Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here today with us for today's one-stop business workshop, Say Hello To. That's presented by CBC, CAVCO, and the CMPA. Today's topic is producing in the time of COVID-19. And we're very excited to be welcoming Michelle from the Documentary Organization of Canada. I'm Marcia Douglas, the Senior Director of Business Affairs at the CMPA. Just quick background on Michelle. She has tons of experience from the film sector. Before joining the Documentary Organization of Canada, she worked at the National Film Board since 2006, where she was the Executive Director of the NFB's English studio. So she has a ton of experience in editorial, creative, operations, and financing for documentary and lots of other kinds of projects as well. And she is joining us today to talk about producing the time of COVID, not just about documentary, but I think we'll have that lens. And I'm really excited that you're here, Michelle. I know you've been doing tons of good work and really joined the organization in the heat of this. So thank you for being here, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Great, thanks very much, Marcia, and thanks all of you for joining the session today. I think we'll go to the first slide, and I'll give you a bit of an overview. Boy, there's a lot to cover in this topic. As Marcia just said to me, it's our first pandemic. Nobody wants to be first. So what I'm going to do today is go through things at a very high level, starting with how producers are being impacted. At DOC, we actually did a survey of our members at the Documentary Organization of Canada. We represent documentary filmmakers across the country. We have about 800 members from coast to coast, and we surveyed them to understand better early on how they were being impacted. And I think those results apply to pretty much everyone. So I'll go through some of the key takeaways. Then we'll get into, can I shoot? Is it actually authorized in my jurisdiction? How should I shoot? How do I know that I'm following the guidelines that I'm supposed to be following, public health and safety? And should I shoot? Some of the ethical and moral considerations to think through, because sometimes even though it's okay to shoot, technically, legally, there might be other factors that make you, reconsider if you need to be shooting right now. Then we'll get into some of the key pragmatic planning considerations for producers, things around budget and around schedule and around insurance and travel and border, and how that's going to impact different elements just of your planning, things that you're going to need to talk to your funding partners about and make sure that everyone is on the same page about how things will work. And then finally, we'll go into creating your own health and safety plans and where you can look to for guidance as you're doing that. And then finally, we'll share a few resources and then open it up for questions. So yeah, let's dig in and go to that first slide. How are producers being impacted? Well, actually, this is the first part. I like Marcia's better. It's our first pandemic, but I decided to frame it around nothing is quite as it used to be, and everyone is figuring this out all at the same time. There's a lot of gray right now, and I know that creates a lot of stress and anxiety for people, but please know that you're not alone. Everyone, even the most senior producers, are in a situation they've never, ever been in before, and that also creates a great community. I found throughout this period, people have been so generous with each other, really sharing knowledge and experiences and in a really transparent way. So encourage you to reach out to community, to others who might be a few steps ahead of you. This is really a time to depend on community because we're all figuring this out. So we can go to the next slide. So yeah, how are producers being impacted? As I said, we conducted a survey of our members in mid-April. And I don't think any of this comes as a big surprise, but at that point, of course, production had ground to a halt. So there were a lot of people with in our case, documentaries that were in production where all of a sudden everything had to stop. And so producers had immediate concerns. Well, what does this mean for my schedule? I have commitments. Am I going to be able to deliver? What does this mean for my budget? I've had to cancel shoots. I still need to pay out some people, so my budget is going to overrun. How am I going to deal with that? My cash flow, how does this impact my cash flow? Do I need to renegotiate things with my bank in order to ensure that I'm still going to be able to cash flow my production? My financing, am I going to have to find additional sources of financing or renegotiate with my financiers? These new costs that I can see are going to quickly come into play. Crew availability, I don't know when we can shoot again. Will my crew be available? How am I going to manage all of that? If it's a documentary, access to participants, how are things changing for them? Are they even going to be comfortable moving forward, participating in a documentary, having a crew in their home, in their community? How am I going to work that out? How does this impact delivery deadlines that are in the contract with my broadcaster? And then my release plans. There were a lot of our members, for example, that had just learned their film was accepted into Tribeca or Hot Docs, you know, yay, what every filmmaker is looking for, that opportunity to have that in the room moment with audiences and feel that reaction to the fruit of your labor. And then all of a sudden that's happening online or it's been canceled. So a lot of questions immediately. And then at a second level, people started to think, okay, travel restrictions, how is that going to work? My project involves shooting on 5 international locations. Am I going to be able to travel with my crew? And if I have to work with a local crew, how does that impact my tax credits? Or if it's an international co-production, how do I make sure I stay on side in terms of my Canadian versus my international spend? Insurance companies right away started to introduce COVID exclusions into their policies. How is that going to work? Is that going to be acceptable to my bank who's doing my interim financing, or to my funders and broadcasters? Crew and participant safety. How do I keep everybody safe when we're able to start shooting again? How much are my costs going to go up for production and post-production? So these were all major concerns that people had cited early on, and we don't have clear answers for all of this. As I said, everyone's kind of figuring it out all together. People flag concerns about the continued viability of their projects, especially in documentary. You're following real life as it unfolds. If you can't shoot for a few months, sometimes things move on too much and you just can't follow the story in the way that you'd planned. And so you have to renegotiate that with the people who are backing you financially. People were concerned about current commitments and if those would change at all. But I think everyone, Canadian funders, broadcasters, have really stepped up with assurances that introducing a lot of flexibility and maintaining a commitment to current projects. So that's really helped take down everyone's stress and anxiety. And then big concerns about distribution plans and strategies. If you're doing a project that's aimed for theaters, how's that going to work? I live in Quebec and theaters are, I think they're opening up again. I forget if they opened up last week, but when are people going to be comfortable going to theaters? It's not just about them being open. It's about when people feel comfortable being in that kind of space again. And then people also spoke about those lost networking opportunities. People go to markets, they go to festivals, industry events, they meet the decision makers, the broadcasters, the funders, potential co-production partners. That's where a lot of that key relationship building and deal making happens. That's not happening anymore in the real world. So how does that shift for people in terms of looking towards their next project that they're trying to get off the ground? So lots and lots of questions, and these dated from early April. So kind of immediately people were thinking all of that through. Let's go to the next slide. So that brings us to, can I shoot? How do I shoot? Should I shoot? So first off, is shooting permitted? And whatever province that you're in, you need to be looking for your local guidelines. Is production as an activity, has that come back online? In some places, it wasn't officially stopped. I think in Manitoba, for example, shooting was always permitted. In other jurisdictions, Ontario, BC, Quebec, for example, it is just now coming back online. So you need to find out what are the relevant public health and safety guidelines that are applicable to where you're shooting and to your film sets. And then are there additional recommendations that you can consult? So there are different cast and crew and producers, professional associations, government boards, agencies that are starting to develop companion guidelines to help people that are working in the film and production industry as they're developing protocols for their own project that are in compliance with the formal public health and safety guidelines. Two of the most robust that have come up so far, and that's why I've put them on the slide here, are Ontario Section 21 Health and Safety Guidelines. This is a really robust document, and it includes like section by section, unit by unit guidelines. So for everyone, this is a really good one to look at. And the BC Motion Picture Safety Guidelines is also quite comprehensive. They'll be coming out soon with a unit by unit overview as well. This is kind of like the first phase of their guidelines. And similar documents exist for different provinces and jurisdictions. And yeah, I just really recommend for you to look at these kinds of resources as you're thinking through what's needed for your particular project. Once you figured out if it's permitted, the next question is, you know, should I shoot? And I talked a bit about this before, but what are the risks to the individuals in the community where you're shooting? This is something that we as documentarians think about a lot. If you're shooting in a small northern community, for example, that has not had any cases of COVID, and you're bringing a crew from the south, is that something you really want to do? Is that something that the community is comfortable with? Is it absolutely necessary that you shoot right now? Is it something that you could perhaps do remotely? Could you do it differently without bringing a crew into the location? So there's just different ethical or social cultural factors that might be really specific to your project that are important to think through. And then what are the other resources that you can look at? Organizations like the Canada Media Fund, the CMPA, the Canada Media Producers Association, DOC, the Directors Guild of Canada, have all developed robust resource lists, and we'll provide you some links later on. There's also a lot of great film groups, online groups and forums where you can just exchange information more informally. At DOC, for example, we have a listserv, and that's where members are often, you know, asking really kind of practical and pragmatic questions and trying to tap into the knowledge and experience of others within our community. Your own professional networks, you probably know someone who's maybe already started shooting or is going into post-production in a very different environment, because post-production houses, of course, also are following new health and safety protocols. So ask around and learn from your peers. And these are all ways that you can quickly inform yourself and start to think through what it is that you need to be doing for your particular project. Let's go to the next slide. So some of the planning considerations from a producerial perspective, first off is how are these new requirements, public health and safety, how is that going to affect your director's creative approach? So that's something that needs to be thought through, and that needs to be shared with all of your funders, making sure that everyone's comfortable with the changes in approach that you need to be following in order to keep people safe. And once you've figured out how is this impacting your creative, how does that impact your schedule? You're not going to be able to have as many people together at any one time, so you'll probably get less done in a day than you would in normal circumstances. So how many more days do you need to be budgeting for? How's that impacting your budget? If your budget was locked pre-COVID, how are you going to be gapping that? So you need to be talking to your financial partners. Is there flexibility on their end? How are you going to be finding that increased money that you need to complete your new budget, taking into consideration all these factors? COVID insurance, and this is something Marcia knows a lot more about than I, but the CMPA thankfully is leading an initiative to create like a backstop, basically an insurance backstop that would give insurers the comfort to issue COVID insurance for production. At the moment, if you're buying production insurance, it'll come with a COVID exclusion. So that's something we're hoping will change, but at the moment, that's a reality. How does that impact you? And also in terms of your different funders, will they accept an insurance policy that has a COVID exclusion? These are all things that are being worked through. Is there travel involved for your crew, or are you bringing people from, say, the US or another country, for example, that are coming to work on your project? And what are the relevant quarantine rules? At the moment, people can come in from the US and other international locations, but they do have to self-isolate for 2 weeks. So you need to build that into your budget, build that into all of your planning. So you need to make sure you're factoring that in. Who's going to lead on creating your health and safety protocols? And you need that for all phases: pre-production, production, post-production, release. You need to ensure that that's complying with all relevant aspects of the public health measures. So you need to think about that. Who's going to be leading on training your crew, making sure everyone's informed of what's different and what it is they need to be doing. And then getting back to those ethical considerations, we know that people over age of 60, 70 are more susceptible to COVID. People with certain pre-existing health conditions can be more susceptible. Is there anyone on your cast or your crew, your actors, your participants who are part of a vulnerable group? And you need to think through what are your responsibilities in that context as well. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So then creating your health and safety plan. So that's going to include things like, and again, that section 21 document is going to be really critical for you to be thinking through some of these things, but staying pretty high level. Some of the things are your protocols to control the number of people in any given location. You don't want people coming in and coming out, that needs to be controlled, and you need to have, question checks and symptom checks as people are coming into locations. So what are your protocols around that? Protocols around physical distancing, changing the way people work so that those protocols can be observed. Hygiene protocols, hand washing stations, all of that kind of stuff, people knowing how to wash their hands, how often, cleaning and disinfecting of high touch services, identifying what are the high touch surfaces and what needs to be cleaned and who's responsible for that, disinfected, not just cleaned. Protocols around symptom checks to make sure everyone's feeling okay, no fever, sore throat, loss of, taste, those kind of classic symptoms. Orientation and training for everyone, signage, so people are constantly reminded of what it is they need to be doing and how they need to be doing it. Also understanding vendor policies. If you're picking up equipment or going into a post-production house, what are their policies? What do your crew need to be aware of? And that's just a few things, but very high level, but to start to get your brain thinking about those things. And then your plan, you're going to need to create a plan for the specific elements of your project. So you need to be assessing the risks, your measures to reduce those risks. You're going to have policies and protocols for each unit and department, really thinking about their day-to-day, what they do, and then how you create new measures to adapt to the kind of work they do. How are you monitoring your workplace, making sure everything is going as it should, updating plans, who do you report to if something is going awry or someone's not comfortable, communications plan, training, and then again, those ethical things, taking into consideration mental health and any other specific guidelines. Yeah, and I think we should go to questions now.
So thank you so much, Michelle. What a great start and so much to think about. Off the top, just because I know you come with this deep expertise from the documentary side, but on the scripted side, do producers and creators need to be thinking about the same things?
I think so, absolutely. I think these are universal considerations. And when you're working on the scripted side, things tend to be a little bit more controlled. You're working in more of a studio location. Everything is very blocked out. Documentary is much more like jazz. It's much more improvisational. And for that reason, at Doc, actually, we're going to be in partnership with the CBC, the National Film Board, and the DGC, working on developing protocols that are asking some of the questions that documentarians have about their specific shooting in people's homes, shooting in location, shooting in different kinds of communities, and how they think through their responsibilities and how to create plans and protocols. So there's a lot that's the same, but some things are a little bit different.
And we're starting to get some questions. And before I turn to the first one, I'll just say, so just to say though that because it's terrific that you're working on some more guidance through that doc lens, but in the meantime, would you suggest that that documentary storytellers use the existing protocols to just work off of for now?
Yeah, absolutely. And so much work and thought has gone into those existing protocols, and people who represent all different genres were part of developing them. They're really thorough, and that's the place where everyone needs to be starting for sure.
Yeah, and I would add, and Michelle's already said this, but it wasn't me, but part of our team who did that. So it's just the guidance that's out there is guidelines. As Michelle said, you have to think on your individual production, what makes sense for that. And then Michelle, do you think that that also involves, you know, working with your department heads and your cast to make sure that you have that buy-in from everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. The buy-in is essential. And that's the place where we as human beings often fall down. How many have all of us been in situations where people have things in their heads and they assume they've been communicated? So developing your communication plan, communicating with the heads of all of the departments, and being extremely rigorous about all of that is absolutely essential. And I think Marcia, the CMPA, is working on some checklists to help people think through those elements.
Yeah, so and I think we've had a couple of questions. So the whole deck will be put up on the business and rights side, and Michelle has included some terrific links in her deck to resources that we've been talking about here. But the CMPA's website, for example, we have I think we're calling it Return to Work, and it's available not just to members, it's available to anyone. And as part of that, you'll see links to certain provinces where the guidelines have been published. And down the road, we're working on potential checklists and things for producers to think through as they're working on it. And there's links to places where you can potentially buy PPE, which stands for personal protective equipment, as an example, and even some questions about insurance. Now, one of the questions that we've received, Michelle, is if you're a part of the crew, so as a PA, for example, how can we protect ourselves from production, or how do we make sure, you know, that there's a protocol in place? What happens if the production doesn't have protocols or isn't following protocols?
Yeah, those are great questions. And I think if you find yourself in a situation like that, immediately you need to have a conversation with the producer. Like, that's an obligation. Protocols need to be in place. That's the producer's obligation as an employer. So if you have those kinds of concerns, you need to flag them right away and be really proactive. It's really important that people feel safe, and no matter what your position is within a crew, don't keep it for yourself, but do flag that immediately. I mean, this is, you know, people's health and their safety, and it could be their lives that are at risk. So really, really important that if you're feeling you don't know what the guidelines are, they haven't been shared, or things have been overlooked, flag that. And each production should have a designated person, but I mean, go right to the top, go to your producer and say, hey, I have concerns about this.
Yes, and someone has written in, and I you know, we would of course agree that people who are vulnerable, who might be carriers, they're of all age groups or all demographics. So just something to keep in mind, especially when people are asymptomatic. Their question is, how do you or can you work if there's a crew member who who doesn't maybe believe in COVID-19, or who thinks it might have been over dramatized or overblown, and doesn't think it's more than just a flu. my guess is it might have something to do with just, having those protocols in place and the training, but I don't know, what do you do with people who maybe aren't following the protocols as a crew member or as a producer?
I think if someone's not following the protocols, they need to be taken off that set, and again, that would be the producer who needs to do that. And if you as a crew member are seeing that, you need to flag and raise your concerns. I mean, I think we all know there are people who are out there. The other day I went to the mountain in Montreal and there was someone standing with a sign in the middle of the road saying, "It's all a hoax, give me a hug. Human beings have the human right to hug." And, unfortunately there's lots of people with different opinions, but people need to be following these protocols. And if someone isn't on board with it, then they shouldn't be on that.
Can you give a little more detail? You're talking about the added costs and thinking about that budget, and especially you mentioned production and post-production. Just wondering about some other examples that people may need to sort of think through that maybe aren't as familiar with reading all of the guidelines so far.
Yeah, I mean, definitely all your timelines, like everything is going to take more time than it did before. Marcia talked about PPE. If you're having to procure PPE for your set, depending on how large your set is, you might be having to install plexiglass in different areas to control the spread of droplets and different things. So there's all kinds of different considerations that your different departments are going to have to be thinking through. Makeup, others, how does that work? And all of that means it takes more time, and more time means it's going to cost more money. And again, those checklists and the guidelines that are out there already are really going to help you to think through what those additional costs might be. If you're, in terms of post-production, maybe you're not going to bring someone in for a recording session or an ADR session. Maybe that's going to be done remotely. That might affect time in a different way. So it's affecting both time and it's affecting money, but things are really changing in terms of how they're done. So it's just important to really be systematic and think it through step by step, and if there is a cost component attached to it.
And then I know that it's our first pandemic and we're all figuring out this sort of immediate next steps. In your conversations and talking with your members, are you hearing a lot about what we think this might look like going forward? I think 5 years from now is hard to predict, but what are some of the other concerns that are happening, not just immediately and how to get the cameras rolling again, but things that we need to be thinking about in kind of maybe more the next 12 months?
Yeah, none of us have a crystal ball, of course, but I think the one that, I hear most often is, the waves. We know that the virus doesn't like the heat, and maybe we have a bit of a reprieve right now in Canada, but in the fall there could be a second wave, and things that we can do right now in June 2020 might not be possible in September, October. So things are going to shift, which makes it really hard to plan. And production is all about, planning as much as you can so that you can really control your costs and control your schedule. So it's the uncertainty factor, and there continue to be a lot of uncertainties. That's the one that I hear the most. Until a vaccine is developed, we're going to be living with a high degree of uncertainty. I think for me, that's the biggest one. How about you, Marcia? Are there others that come to your mind?
Well, I think, that insurance question is one, like, what does that look like? And I think from the buying landscape, and that was going to be, I think, the last question maybe have some time for, and I'll turn it back to you too, Michelle, is, the impact hasn't just been on creators and producers, but also on distributors and on broadcasters. And I think we're all trying to figure out what that looks like. So I think that uncertainty from our members extends that way too, is, what will that look like for not just, the opportunity from a business perspective, but I think there's also a bit of a creative question out there too. I think there's only so much room in the market for COVID stories, but what do people want to see now, and sort of how to re-engage especially because audiences have been consuming content so voraciously. But I guess that's the question for you too, Michelle, to go back. Last question is, as markets are changing and opportunities are changing, any tips or things to think about, or things that you're hearing, even either in the short term in terms of trying to sell your content and get out there, but how do you think that part is changing?
Yeah, it's a big question. I mean, people are consuming a lot of content online. There are some streamers. Oh God, I'm going to forget their name now. But one on the States that's done really amazing work in terms of partnering with theaters. And so it's like a theatrical release, but happening online. So there are new models that are being invented, and that includes revenue share. Like, just an example with festivals, I think Hot Docs did such an amazing job of pivoting really quickly and delivering an online festival. And then they, and not all festivals are doing this, but they were real pioneers in terms of having a revenue share model with filmmakers. So filmmakers received a split of the revenue based on the number of times that their film was streamed. And I know a filmmaker the other day received a check already for $3,000, which was very pleasantly surprised. There are a lot of webinars that are being given in association with organizations like CMPA, DGC, DOC, and others that are looking at not just production, but also distribution, what's changing, streaming opportunities, festivals, how to think through, should you wait until festivals are happening in the real world, or should you go with an online festival? You can find so much of that online. So I think the key, and things change from day to day. I find it really hard to, what made a lot of sense a week ago is sometimes a little bit different today. So just research that, reach out. As I said, there's a great sense of community now. People are really supporting each other. So yeah, just keep your eyes open to see what's out there for you to learn from.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle. Time goes by so fast on these sessions. Just for everyone listening, a reminder that I think there's actually a Facebook group set up for everyone who's participating in these sessions. That is another good community to touch base with. The amazing links and resources that Michelle has talked about will be posted. And there is not a session tomorrow, so the next one will be on July 2nd. Oh, I'm crying. And I believe it's about green production and sustainable media production. So tune in for that one. Thank you again so much, Michelle, and to CBC and CAPCO and CMPA. And have a good Canada Day tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Marcia, for great moderation.